Hi everyone, day 3 of the 30-day challenge for posting live videos to let people know, as part of a group that I'm in, the Business Mastery Program with Simone Douglas and Social Media AOK. And the object of the exercise is to become more comfortable with social media platforms and also to work on growing the business. There are lots of benefits, of course, from this whole program. So one of the questions that came through from a very dear cosmic brother of mine, Francesco, from upstate New York, who I shared a wonderful adventure in Hawaii with almost a couple of years ago now, which changed my life in many ways. And the bonds we made with that group of people were quite profound and wonderful, and my heart warms whenever I think of them. And Francesco's query was about how is it that some people in experiencing trauma seem to kind of just get up and bounce back and move on with their lives, and others it can be quite a crippling and debilitating process that bears little connection to the severity of the trauma or the perception of the severity of the trauma. And it's actually a really good question, because that is what happens. Some people deal with it more efficiently, effectively, in a more resilient manner, and for others, a small trauma can literally knock them on their feet for many years as things are being processed. Some years ago, I did a stint with Professor Sandy McFarlane, who held the chair of rehabilitative psychiatry at Adelaide Uni at the time, and I was his research nurse for a couple of years. And he was the PTSD go-to person, I suppose. He lectures all around the world, done a lot of work in China and various places, post-earthquakes, and Kuwait with post-war stuff and the Ash Wednesday fires stuff. So I got to have a really good look at the issue of trauma. And in truth, every form of mental illness, as far as I'm concerned, or mental not coping, is a result of childhood trauma. And there are many, many ways that you can traumatize a child. And what traumatizes a child isn't what traumatizes an adult. And so when this happens, I don't know if you can hear it or not, but Isis has come to join me. Oh God, I might have to get up and move her. Be quiet, hissy one. And so, trauma leads to varying and profound forms of mental illness, including anxiety, depression, addiction, inability to form strong and cohesive relationships with other members of your family or community, patterns of trauma that then get acted out generation after generation. The correlation between one generation experiencing something and having that drop down to the next one is actually quite high. And each generation, as we talked about yesterday, will pick up the wounds at conception and carry them forward until someone somewhere in the ancestral line turns, faces it, and clears it out for themselves, the bloodline, and all future children. So, oh, hello, my dear. So what happens when a child is traumatized? And as again, we talked about yesterday, parts of the self are divided, split off. But one way that a child can deal with trauma is to simply block it out. You're quite right, are there, madam? I know it's International Cat Day. However, I don't really think you have a lot to offer here. No. So the blocking off of traumatic events is a very powerful and useful way that a child has to simply put away what cannot be dealt with. And it can remain buried for years. It can remain buried for a lifetime. It will get handed on, blocked or not. But the shutting out of events, and if any of you have experiences where you have great gaps in your childhood memories, that's usually as a consequence of trauma, that something has happened to you. And again, it doesn't take much to traumatize a child. So, but some of those events are profoundly traumatizing that would traumatize an adult as well. And so it's a blunt instrument. It won't just block out the trauma of the event that unfolded, that terrified or overwhelmed the child. It can block out years either side. And those gaps remain until such time as the trauma erupts in another capacity, or that the patient is, or the client or the person has determined that what's going on in their life behaviourally, relationship-wise, is so not working that they go and get some therapy to find out what's at the cause of it. And that's where we do the digging. And remember, whatever is offered up in therapy in terms of memory of traumatic events, it can be quite a slippery vehicle, the memory. Memories change over time, there's no doubt about it. And your deep unconscious in its wisdom will correlate several memory events and roll them into one so that you can get access to the emotional release you need. So the system is very, very clever in how it works, in what it offers you in terms of setting you free. And it may not necessarily be what happened, and you need to bear that in mind, but it's your system giving you a correlation of events, whatever is required to help you access the pain of the trauma, to release it and allow yourself to move on with your life. So why do some people bounce through it and why do some people not? And a lot of it depends on resilience. If you were raised in a way that you were allowed to fall down and pick yourself up and dust yourself off, and you were not made wrong for having a mistake or making a mistake, you were not humiliated or degraded for that, but that you were encouraged to examine what happened and offered and taught ways of moving this through your system. In other words, if you were given a good set of coping skills when you were a child to deal with the shocks and bruises of life, and life is harrowing. Life, I think it was Hobbes who said, is nasty, brutish and short. It's true. And so this process of helicopter parenting, this process of protecting children from any and all harm is not in their best interests, I assure you. Children need to learn to roll with it. They need to understand that life will offer them shocks on a regular basis, because that is how we grow. That is how we grow. It's that simple. So it's quite unrealistic to train a child to not experience any of the knocks of life, the rejections, the fall downs, and then expect them to walk into the world and cope. They won't cope. It's that simple. So we're creating a new set of problems with that approach as well. But if a child is given good coping mechanisms, good skills to navigate the fall downs of life, then it builds what is known as resilience. And that will allow it to adjust to greater knocks and greater shocks as they move along, because they know they can do it. They've learned how to do it. So if a child is not given those skills, then when the knocks and bruises come, it can have a devastating effect because they haven't developed those coping mechanisms. So that's one reason why some children or some adults cope better than others. One lot has been given a better set of coping mechanisms and understands that this is part of life, and that we are never given anything in truth that we can't handle, because that is also the truth. We are never given anything we cannot handle, despite what the lunatic in your head might be telling you to the contrary. Oh my God, it's all doom and gloom and we're never going to cope and this is the end of my life. Those are part of the lie, the things you must delete. When you get into a crisis, it can be very useful to get rid of the emotion, to clear it out, to use the breath to do it, go and see a therapist, go and do what you need to do, get some body work to clear the emotion out. And then think about, well, I've been in crises before, how have I dealt with that? And so you go back and figure out your navigational devices for getting through things, and understand that, you know, whatever it is, you're going to get through it. Things are never quite as bad as they seem. Just because something feels terrible doesn't really mean that something terrible is happening. It's just your emotional body or your pain body informing you in a couple of heartbeats what you could read a dozen books about and still not get to the nub of it. So that's one reason why some people deal better or more effectively with trauma than others. Another reason is that if you were traumatized as a child, and if you have put out ways of burying that, or you've blocked off that trauma completely, then what can happen when you reach adulthood and you go into any situation that generates trauma or loss or anxiety, then what can happen is that original trauma gets woken up. And suddenly you're having all these experiences of flashbacks that make no sense, exaggerated startle response. Someone makes a noise behind you and you're plucking yourself off the ceiling. Avoidance of triggers that can remind you of the event. It can become quite debilitating, the effects of PTSD. You can get what's called anhedonia, an inability to enjoy anything in life anymore. It's really quite profound. And what's happened there, and what's so confusing for people sometimes, is that the traumatic event in adulthood didn't seem that bad, but then suddenly all this other stuff comes screaming to the surface. And what we know from PTSD studies is that people who experience PTSD in war or natural disaster or abuse of some kind, there's a very high correlation between those who experience PTSD and those who have an untreated childhood trauma. So that's another really powerful reason why some people get poleaxed by things and others can, yep, there's another one of those life things and I'll just keep going. But trauma is a very powerful thing, and it sets up all kinds of interesting neural pathways and byways. And so these can have a devastating impact on your life. And if you're experiencing some of that, if you're experiencing anxiety that makes no sense to you, and you haven't developed ways of getting through it, if you are experiencing depression and yet everything in your life appears to be fine, why am I feeling like this? Anxiety, depression, addiction is very much about keeping those feelings buried, which is why when some people give up an addiction, they will pick up something else. They'll give up smoking and take up eating, or they'll give up eating and take up rampant, obsessive, compulsive exercising, this kind of thing. And it's because you're still doing whatever it takes. And all addiction, it doesn't matter what you're addicted to, is to suppress the emotional body. So if you're having any of those things, and then you just suddenly try and give up the addiction, then those feelings start coming to the surface. You've been burying them with food or cigarettes or alcohol, doesn't matter what it is, recreational drugs, and suddenly they start coming to the surface, and it's like, whoa, here comes that painful feeling, smoke it down, drink it down, do whatever is required to eat it down. And so if you're having issues like this with addiction that is difficult to resolve, with depression that makes no sense, with anxiety that really is quite illogical, then it is quite likely that there is some childhood experience lurking in the psyche there that wants to heal, that wants to come back, but the conscious mind is doing everything in its power to keep it at bay because it was the one that put it away in the first place. And as we mentioned last night again, as the great Buddha describes the conscious mind, it is like a wild elephant being ridden by a mad monkey. And the job is to remove the monkey, and there are very powerful and effective ways of doing that. But then it's your job as client to domesticate the elephant. And there are powerful and effective ways of doing that. So I hope, Francesca, that answers your question about why some people cope better than others. And there are a myriad other reasons, of course, but I did kind of bang on a bit last night, so I'm trying not to do that tonight. But if you have these kinds of issues, please bear in mind that with a background of 40 odd years in psych and mental health and 25 years in shamanic practice and transpersonal counselling, art therapy, I have developed and accumulated a really interesting skill set, and some of these I've developed myself, where we get to the nub of it very, very quickly. These things don't require years of intensive psychotherapy anymore. I'm not a big fan of it, in fact. I think it just tends to re-traumatize people. But there are simple ways of getting to the nub of it, to the root cause of it, and flushing it out of the system, and to remove the author of the dark voice in your head. And so if you are wrestling with some of the things, and they are incredibly debilitating, I have great compassion for it. I am more than happy to meet with you, and it usually takes 1 or 2 sessions to flush this stuff out of your field and let you seize life a little more effectively by the throat. Make it yours, because it is. And do remember that, yeah, You have everything you need inside you to deal with whatever you create and co-create in this life. That is absolutely true. The lunatic in your head will do its level best to convince you that the opposite is true. It is a lie. Do not believe it. Delete, 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 remember. All right, treasures, that's my third one, and I'll look at another subject tomorrow. I'm wishing you all a wonderful weekend. Please stay warm. It is freezing. This is our first Antarctic blast of the winter, and my sense is very strongly get used to them. The long winter is coming. So have a great weekend. Enjoy yourselves. Be kind to yourself and your loved ones, and I will see you at the same bat channel and the same bat time, roughly, tomorrow. Journey well.